Literally, it was easier to control 1 million people than physically to kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. It is easier to kill than to control.
Now, Madame Blavatsky, one of the greatest scholars the world has ever known, writes in this way. She says, the appellation Satan in Hebrew belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, not in the serpent which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom.
Evil men have already divided up the world into regions, and they've got it all planned. They want to rule the world. Their goal is to reduce the population to 500 million, with a few of them as the elite get to rule the world. God has plans for the world, and so does Satan. And Satan's plan is no people here, maybe just a few, and a one-world government.
Its task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity. It isn't just a crisis.
We know the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Do you not think an angel rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm?
But I do have one question. During the crisis or any time that you're aware of, has the Federal Reserve or Treasury participated in any gold swaps arrangements?
The Federal Reserve does not own any gold at all. We have not owned gold since 1934.
You fired me once again! Now with these plains, which hither ye have brought from regions where I reign.
My readings have told me, for what it's worth, that some of us will be able to have ascended abilities. I mean, full-on ascended abilities prior to the actual shift happening. So that would be very cool, because what we're expecting after 2012 is a 100 times more harmonious utopian world where things like time travel, levitation, instant telepathy, instant healing, telekinesis are as common and as everyday as breathing.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law.
All of the conspiracy theories that you've ever heard about one world government, about the UN takeover of the world, all of those conspiracies have now been laid to rest. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. It's all published. The UN-funded Commission on Global Governance began meeting in 1992 in earnest and met for 4 years, and last fall released their final report. It is entitled Our Global Neighborhood.
I'd like to talk to Christians about something that might rock your worldview, but I hope that you'll listen with a heart that sincerely wants to know the truth. I'm going to start out with a couple of assumptions. The first being that you're aware of the plan to bring the world under a New World Order global government. I'm going to assume that you're aware of the heavy metals and toxins being put into the air, and I'm going to assume that you're aware of Agenda 21. If you're unfamiliar with any of those things, I'll leave some links at the end of the video for you to check out. For the first couple of years researching chemtrails and the agenda behind them, like many Christians, I thought that these events were so completely in line with what I saw in Scripture that these must be the end times. I'm not sure when the Lord's return is, but I don't think that's ever supposed to be our focus, since Jesus said, "No one knows the day or the hour." We're just told to always be prepared. Christians have speculated on Jesus' return since his ascension. But what I want to look at today is the popular belief in a 7-year period of tribulation, after which Jesus will return and put an end to evil in the world. Specifically, I want us to look at the doctrine that was introduced in the 1800s called dispensationalism that teaches this. I'd like us to consider how that teaching affects how we understand and respond to the crimes currently being committed against all humanity. I thought it was more than a little interesting that the New World Order agenda also started in full force in the 1800s. I want us to consider what it would mean if dispensationalism is wrong, how it would change the way we're living today if this end times teaching was actually started by the same people who are trying to bring about the New World Order communist government. There's propaganda for it everywhere, like this image at the Denver airport. Looking at this image from a dispensational point of view, it looks like what we've been told about the tribulation. This scene looks like what we've been told will happen after the Christians are raptured. Notice what appears to be a chemtrail fading into a rainbow, which in the occult symbolizes Lucifer. Let's look at this painting another way. What if it's propaganda, indoctrination into a fatalistic end times script? When I first became aware of chemtrails and geoengineering, on the one hand, I didn't understand why Christians weren't concerned in protesting, while at the same time, I was genuinely confused about what a believer's responsibility should be, because, like so many others, I believed that time was so short before the Lord's return. People kept telling me that it's all prophecy, it has to happen, there's nothing we can do to change it. While at the time I agreed about it being prophecy, I couldn't make peace with not doing anything about it. When I encountered people who were actively protesting chemtrails and geoengineering, they shared with me that they saw Christians as naive and self-serving as a result of their belief that this was all the fulfillment of prophecy and that the rapture was going to come take them away. After doing some research, I found out that this doctrine was behind Christians being unconcerned about world events, causing them to see events as having been prophesied and therefore inalterable, as well as believing that we're not going to be here when it gets bad. But what if that isn't true? The scary thing is that I've looked into the origins of this teaching, and it looks like that's the case. At the time of its introduction, Christians condemned dispensationalism as being a heretical teaching. If it's a false teaching, we need to get back to solid Christian doctrine that teaches, among other things, taking a much more active role in civic affairs. Because the thing is, if we do nothing, if they get this New World Order, like Chris White said in the video, it's not going to be applause and clapping and lemonade. What it's going to be is the worst time in human history. It will be all the abuse of human rights and horrors we've seen in communist countries, but on a global scale. And because of the advanced technologies that exist today, it's going to be unimaginably worse. So I want to take you through the history of the origins of this doctrine and ask you to think about the ramifications if, in fact, all of this is a false interpretation of the timeline in the book of Daniel, changing the understanding of the prophecies in the book of Revelation, Isaiah, and elsewhere in the Bible to mean something other than what they were intended to mean. We're hearing a lot today about the rise in occult spiritualism during the 19th century, but I believe that what was happening in the church at that time was equally important. The Theosophists and Freemasons of the 1800s were talking about a plan for world domination, a new world order. Their plans included uniting all nations under one religion as well as government. Part of that plan was to discredit and completely eliminate Orthodox Christianity. John Nelson Darby is known as the author of Dispensationalism and the Secret Rapture Doctrine. He first described these views in 1830, but the doctrine actually dates back to 1580 during the time of the Reformation. At that time, Jesuit priest Francisco Ribera presented a futurist interpretation of the Book of Revelation to counter the fact that the Reformationists saw the Church of Rome as the Antichrist. Futurism moved the prophetic timeline in the Book of Daniel to a time in the future. It was taught in the Catholic Church from that point on, but was rejected by the Reformationists who had suffered through the Inquisitions, where reportedly 68 million Christians were tortured and killed by the Catholic Church over a span of 500 years. From the time of the Reformation, it has been the goal of the Catholic Church to bring the Protestants back under the control of Mother Rome. In the 1800s, a Scottish pastor named Edward Irving translated the teaching to English and added the secret rapture of the Church. He taught that Christ would return twice, once to remove his church, and then to establish a physical kingdom on the earth and rule from a restored Israel. Irving had a big influence on John Nelson Darby. Darby brought it to America in the mid-1800s. This interpretation of prophecy was not popularly accepted in the church until the early 20th century after the creation of the Schofield Bible and when Louis Chafer brought it to Dallas Theological Seminary. Dispensationalism taught a few unique things, like a distinction between the Old Covenant nation of Israel and the Church of Christ, a 7-year tribulation period, a secret rapture, an Antichrist who is a single person, and that things on earth will become progressively worse until the return of Christ. The Reformationists believed that the Catholic Church was the beast Antichrist system. Martin Luther and other Reformationists bravely took a stand against this evil and effectively subdued it. Is it not our responsibility to do the same? As this fatalist doctrine gained popularity, the focus of the church narrowed from including civic duty to focusing only on church, family, and the saving of souls. When the church backed away from civic involvement, those in the occult, encountering little resistance, were given a lot of freedom to move forward with their plans. From a dispensational perspective, The exponential increase of evil in the world today seems to support the belief that we're living in the end times. But isn't it just as likely that the acceleration of evil we're seeing is the result of Christians' civic duty being abandoned? I believe that world events are following a very cleverly laid out script designed to deceive the masses. Most importantly, the church. Because when believers are armed with the truth of Satan's defeat at the cross, as well as their responsibility to prayerfully administrate God's kingdom on earth, they pose a great threat to the establishment of Satan's worldly government. As Christians, we are called to be salt and light, to shine our light and expose evil, to preserve life on earth. The fatalist view that results in doing nothing because things will only get worse until the Lord's return goes against the Word of God, as well as the most basic law that God has instilled in His creation, the law of preservation. All God's creation has a natural instinct to protect life. Today, many Christians have stepped up and are protesting the murder of the unborn, as well as standing against child trafficking and many other crimes against humanity. Is it coincidental that the teaching of this futurist doctrine has the church, at least those who are awake to them, looking at chemtrails and the other poisonings as something that's prophesied and inevitable? We're protesting infanticide as we turn a blind eye to omnicide. The Holocaust and the Inquisitions pale in comparison to what these people have in mind for humanity. And don't be fooled by mainstream news and talk of God's wrath being poured out against mankind. The recent extreme weather and supposed natural disasters around the world that have taken the lives of thousands are being created by geoengineering and associated technologies. History has repeatedly shown that when God's truth is removed from a nation, dictatorship and communism take over, with deadly results. Freedom has never been achieved or maintained by complacency. There were deadly consequences when the truth was infiltrated with lies through the establishment of the Catholic Church. Millions not only lost their lives, but were tortured to death. Is this what has been happening again since the 1900s? Has the Church been infiltrated, and is a false teaching bringing about deadly consequences? In addition to the new end times doctrine, compromised leaders in the church have accepted payoffs to support some of these globalist agenda lies. In their 2010 review of grants extended from 2005 to 2010, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund admitted to buying off so-called non-green voices, meaning people outside the environmental community, to sell man-made climate change doctrine to their respective communities. Quote, "Foundation dollars extended to support these non-green voices have grown dramatically. The RBF has supported allied voices for climate change that include businesses, investors, evangelicals, farmers, sportsmen, labor, military leaders, national security hawks, veterans, youth, and governors and mayors." Unquote. Humanitarian efforts and caring for God's creation are good and belong in the church, but clearly not under the Luciferian banner of sustainability, and not to the exclusion of civic involvement to actively expose, oppose, and change the policies that are creating these crises. Everywhere we look today, we're seeing end times prophecy, and it's not just coming from Christians. The media is putting it out full force. Why are we seeing so many films, TV shows, and best-selling books depicting the end times and the catastrophic end of the world? When was the last time that you've seen Hollywood standing in support of the truth? We know that Hollywood is owned by the elite and is being used to mold and shape culture to their benefit. I'm not here to bash anyone, and I certainly don't want to offend well-meaning Christians. I only mean to say that people are so caught up in the sensationalism and fear from all the end times doom hype that they don't stop to question the doctrine that it's all based upon. It all creates a self-focus as well as an attitude of pride, which has always been man's weakness and Satan's lie. And it takes believers' focus away from living our lives here on this earth the way Jesus intended. What if this end times teaching is a false doctrine? What if the Lord delays his coming and we end up living in a communist New World Order slave state that Christians were deceived into offering no resistance to? What will we tell our children when they ask us why we did nothing to stop it? If the end time script was created by Luciferians, what is their intended goal with this teaching? When we look at the poisonings and technologies in place today, it's clear that they're deliberately producing apathy in our culture. Is it mere coincidence that this end times doctrine produces apathy in the church? I know this is a lot to take in, but I encourage you to look into these things, because I've come to believe that this scene is not inevitable. Rather, it's a lie. It's propaganda. Ask anyone who's lived in a communist country about the end times rapture teaching. You'll likely get a passionate and indignant response. They're very familiar with the tactics currently being employed to bring about global communism. What if men like Martin Luther and John Wesley had kept silent and done nothing? What would our world look like today if they hadn't courageously stood up and denounced what was happening in their time? It would probably look very much like this scene. We must become empowered with the truth again and shine light to expose this darkness. We must become the salt of the earth again. The truth empowers. The truth exposes darkness. The truth sets men free. While the outcome belongs to the Lord, we are to be watchful and diligent in our walk with Christ. Please don't take my word for this or anyone else's. Rather than running to your favorite go-to person or teaching ministry, pray and ask God to guide you into all truth. He's promised us that He'll do that if we seek Him with a pure heart. While my focus here has been on the Catholic Church, I want to be clear that we're not dealing with a religion, nation, or a people group. We're dealing with Satanists. Satanists pretending to be Catholics, Jews, Muslims, and Christians. There's no question that we're witnessing the most ambitious rise of evil in history. Like I said at the beginning, I don't claim to know the timeline, but Jesus never told us to focus on a timeline. He told us to be watchful and to always be prepared for His return. He gave us life in abundance, not only for a time in the future, but for here and now. He gave us authority over all the powers of the evil one, and He told us to administrate the kingdom that's been given to us. Satan would have us focused on what he's doing, to marvel at his wonders and to fear him. That lines up perfectly with this script that's being propagandized everywhere we turn. His goal has always been to have complete control over all humanity, and that's clearly in the works today. But what we need to remember is that Satan is a created being, and that God is astoundingly more powerful than anything we can imagine. I believe that we need to return our focus to the one who has conquered, because in him we are more than conquerors.